Welcome to the PinkpillRx podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or PinkpillRx.
That's Kators 88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.
Before we begin, I want to remind our listeners that with the potential TikTok ban on the horizon, you can always find us on YouTube and Instagram. We're committed to keeping our community connected, so make sure to follow us on those platforms to stay up to date with all of our content. And hey, if you love what we do and our content and want to support our mission, please consider joining our Patreon for just $1 a month. Is that me? Your contribution helps us continue bringing you this content. And if you ever have a story that you want to share with us, please email us at pinkpillrx@gmail.com. All our stories are shared anonymously unless specifically stated that you want your name included. Lastly, we are starting an email list that we're going to eventually use for announcements, podcast episode releases, and any updates. We are also playing around with the idea of sending like fun facts and stats if there's enough interest. So if you'd like to be included in our emails, please use the link in the show notes to sign up. And as a reminder, we're your hosts, Katie
and Jay
Fillmore, and we're thrilled to have you with us for another episode. We have a guest today. She's been on with us before. It's Jay's twin, my sister-in-law and bestie, our neighbor, Noelle Fillmore.
Oh, yeah.
She's a licensed physical therapist, a women's advocate, and locally licensed Nazarene minister. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Hey, buddy.
Long time listener, second time talker.
Second time guest, baby.
First time with good mics, though.
First time with legit setup. This is cool. You know how people think Jay and I look alike? Mm-hmm. Do you think that they think we sound alike? I've not heard that comment. I don't think we do.
I hear it sometimes.
Do you?
I feel like I can hear it sometimes too. I feel like you guys have similar body language sometimes too.
Yeah.
You know, that identical fraternal twin thing.
Yeah.
How often are you guys asked if you guys are identical? So often, right? It used to probably be all the time.
Used to be.
A weird amount of times people ask. And I always am just like, well, you can't be.
Right.
Identical, friends.
He's a boy.
People,
She's
I think,
a girl.
were sleeping in middle school science class or high school science class.
Yeah.
I just start saying yes.
Our topic today, I want to jump into, but first we got to take care of some current events that are going on. We got to talk about something that's happening. Have we ever heard of Selena Chandler Scott before?
I don't think so.
Okay, she's a 24-year-old woman from Georgia. And she was found unconscious and bleeding near her apartment complex.
I did hear about this.
Yeah.
She had a miscarriage.
She had a miscarriage. Now, it was a later miscarriage. It was 19 weeks is what they ended up finding out. And she had disposed of the remains. She had a miscarriage at home. Mm-hmm. She disposed of the remains in the dumpster, in the trash of her apartment complex, from my understanding.
Okay.
And then she was found unconscious and bleeding near that area. Mm-hmm. Okay. Police arrested her.
Oh, my God.
On charges of concealing the death of another person and the abandonment of a dead body.
That's insane.
Whoa.
I did hear about this. It's seriously insane.
It's a 19-week miscarriage. It's a miscarriage. What? It's a medical issue.
Exactly. And although there was no, like, ill harm, like, there was no...
Like
what's the word I'm looking for?
Like foul play.
Suspected foul play upon initial investigation. They sent the fetus out for an autopsy to make sure that it never took a breath. Because if it would have taken a breath, it would have been murder. To make sure there was no like foul play involved. And it ended up coming back that yes, it was a miscarriage. Like the baby had been deceased prior to birth. And yeah. So
did they arrest her at the hospital?
Yeah, after taking her to the hospital and after she was stabilized, they took her into custody.
Just trauma upon trauma. Question.
That's so sad.
Viability is 22 weeks, right?
Depending on what hospital you're at, technically, they will try at 20 weeks sometimes. Some hospitals don't have the capacity to try until 24 weeks, but even 19 weeks is before. Okay. But it's a woman's prerogative legally on how to dispose of fetal remains when it comes to a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She gets to choose.
Good. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you were in a hospital setting, hospitals try to respect you and stuff. But like a 19-week fetus would have been disposed of in a similar manner as medical waste.
Yeah, it would be in a biohazard bag and it
Right.
would be put in some form of waste.
Yes.
Like it's not
Because the size and development and everything.
unless
like
the
it's just,
parent wanted to.
The general rule,
Yeah,
yes,
period.
Yeah,
exactly.
for
The
sure.
general rule is before 20 weeks that it's considered medical waste. And I'm not trying to say that to be like crass and not trying to make light of miscarriage here by using that term, because ultimately it is up to the woman what she decides to do. But there's women who have to fight to even get the remains sometimes. Like even though they're supposed to, if it's under a certain amount of grams, like my mom had a stillbirth at 20 weeks, development stopped a little bit before then. And she had to put up a little bit of a fight to be able to get the remains because the baby weighed under a certain amount of grams. And so it was considered medical waste and not considered
that's a problem.
a body.
Crazy.
That is a big
And my
problem.
parents wanted to have a burial. So
That feels
there was
bad.
there was like a little bit of I know that was a concern
Yeah.
that there was going to be issues possibly with us being able to obtain the remains for burial because of depending on how much the baby weighed. So now that was decades ago. So remember that, But still, this poor woman, you're right, trauma upon trauma.
Unbelievable.
It's wild that you could, just demonizing people that have gone through a miscarriage and assuming that could be a possible abortion. There's so much regulation over we don't have any regulation over endometriosis, but we will regulate the crap out of your miscarriage.
Yeah.
And not in a good way.
Yeah. Not in a way that is going to, not because we're concerned about
No, not at
maternal
all.
mortality rates.
Not at all, even though the U.S. is terrible on the list of mortality.
Yeah. Here's what I understand. How they, to your point, Noelle, they're saying, oh, we're kind of assuming a high probability of abortion here instead of miscarriage, right? And they make an arrest. Shouldn't they do the autopsy first before you make an arrest or charge with anything to determine what the cause of death was?
Right.
You can't charge till there's an autopsy, so why are you going to arrest this poor woman who's having, if nothing else in the minds of the police, a health emergency?
Yeah, she's
And
having a
then
medical
arrest her
emergency.
without this
Absolutely.
baby having an autopsy? What's up with that?
Doesn't feel very pro-life to me.
No,
No.
definitely more pro-birth.
Yeah.
That was at the top of the news as far as women's rights go this week. Jeez. So I wanted to share that. And, this incident really does raise questions about how women are expected to handle miscarriages and at what point they're supposed to report pregnancy losses to law enforcement.
Because that's terrifying. You are already panicking because you think that you're losing a baby. You go, and now you have to worry about being arrested or not having the medical care that you need because you're terrified that they're not gonna do it because you're in a state where they're not gonna do it.
Right.
And they're not going to believe you.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I cannot believe we're in The Handmaid's Tale.
If you live in one of these heartbeat law states and you have a miscarriage, debating on notifying law enforcement is a legit debate that you almost have to have, because it's what happens if something's caught like that and then you're arrested because you disposed of fetal remains. Do tell, don't tell, I don't know.
Right.
Is this the end of at-home management of miscarriages in these states? Because is it just going to be safer to get the D&C if you can even get it?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is just not, how do you even trust that the hospital is going to take care of you?
Yeah.
When you,
Yeah, not just report you.
yeah.
What's a DNC?
A D&C is dilation in...
Cooterage?
I always mess it
I
up.
don't know how to say it. Cutterage?
That's why we say D&C.
Yeah.
But basically they dilate you up there and they scrape out the
Yeah,
inside
it's
of your uterus. They get all the
Cutterage? I gotta look it up.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's not what we're talking about today, ironically. What we're talking about is Christianity and patriarchy.
Like peanut butter and jelly, Christianity and patriarchy.
Yes. Religion and women. This, I will be honest with you, just the topic of this, I could feel it in my body.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I bet. You
Like
hit some history here.
immediately.
My pelvic floor just tightened up.
My body. Oh, God. But it's something that I want to talk about. It's important to talk about. This is definitely going to be more of like an opinion piece podcast. I do have some statistics, and maybe I can open with that. That'll help us guide conversation a little bit. But I would like to just see organically what happens. Let's take a moment and share our backgrounds.
Yeah.
Religiously speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in a very conservative household. It was very traditional roles. My mom stayed home. I was homeschooled. I was one of 8 kids. My dad worked outside the home to support us. And I grew up technically Nazarene, but definitely a very, 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 very conservative version of that. I think that's just kind of the church we attended. I'm not really certain if that's the doctrine that we per se believed in fully. For me, growing up, higher education really wasn't something that was super encouraged, very, very immersed in the religious world. I, instead of going to college, I took a gap year and I went and lived in the Dominican Republic and did, mission work and was like the good Christian girl that did the things, and purity culture, like really steeped in that, really obedient to that. And so I grew up in church, went to church my whole life. And I definitely ran across a lot of church hurt in that process and a lot of just confusion with that church hurt. And now as I've deconstructed patriarchy, I have more what feels like church hurt almost. Whenever my first marriage hit a breaking point is when my faith also kind of hit a breaking point with it. And I started deconstructing, definitely identify as a deconstructed Christian at this particular point in my life.
So I grew up in a somewhat like just non-religious household. My sister and I went to, hi.
That's me.
We went to a Nazarene church, the youth group thing. I got a bit more involved when I was in 8th grade because Noelle bribed me by letting me copy her spelling homework if I went to church, and I said okay because I hated spelling. But I got a lot more interested in spirituality, but then I went through like this crisis, and when I was in high school with like, what do I really believe? Like maybe I should look into Greek mythology or Islam or Jehovah's Witnesses. And my friends used to make fun of me and called me Jehovah because I was just, curious about a lot of different things. Anyway, ended up in...
That's also when you thought you might be the Antichrist?
I thought it was possible. I went through a very weird year, guys. I was 16, 17. I thought I was called to be the Pope at one point. So,
sounds like fun time.
A lot of exploration. So ended up in some very fundamental conservative Pentecostalism for about 7-8 years, immersed in that, was immersed in purity culture somewhat in high school, and started deconstructing about 5 years ago. I've always really liked theology. I got really into the pre-Nicene church fathers, pre-Council of Nicaea church fathers, love theology and Greek and Hebrew as an amateur. And I like studying different theological ideas. It's been like, I have ADHD. It's been a hyper-focused passion of mine since I was like 16. So I like it. Lots of hours.
Very similar to Jay, obviously. All the things as far as growing up. Similarly was involved in a really conservative, and I don't mean politically, but like morally conservative Pentecostal church, similar for a long time, 7-8 years, similar to Jay. And then after that, ended up taking a little break for a while from church, and then found a local church community that I'm a part of now that is actually also a Nazarene church, which I wasn't necessarily looking for a specific denomination. I just wanted a place that I felt like would have the things that I was looking for. And then throughout the last several years have done teaching and preaching and all kinds of other random sorts of fun and not as fun things within the local church, and then started pursuing licensure because I believe that there is goodness in the church. Not that it is without fault, but I do believe that there are good things and that there is a vision of something that could be better than what it is, and I want to be part of whatever that's going to be. So that's why I'm still engaging the way I'm engaging.
I think when we talk about Christianity and patriarchy, Christianity and women, the brand of Christianity we are talking about is going to be more evangelical based.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that's important.
Yeah.
That
For
is our
sure.
background. So
For
just
sure.
to remind you of that, the things we're talking about are the stats that I even throw out there are going to be evangelical based.
Is Reformed considered under the evangelical umbrella
I think
too?
I believe
I don't know if
it.
they're their own thing or not.
I think it is still.
Okay.
So here's some stats to get us started. Ready? 12.9% of all pastors are women, while 87.1% are men. Now, the pay gap,
Oh, jeez.
I was actually proud of this.
Oh.
This wasn't bad.
Okay.
96 cents on the dollar.
Oh,
Oh.
that's pretty close to
It
being
Okay, good
equitable.
was
job.
not
Good job, guys.
bad.
Well, it's only 12.9%. I guess you can spare.
So 36% of secondary clergy roles in evangelical churches are held by women,
What are those?
Like associate.
like associate pastors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the senior leadership remains overwhelmingly male, obviously. And then 39% of evangelicals are comfortable with a female pastor. 72.8% of evangelicals support women preaching on Sunday mornings, not as a senior pastor, but just as like a person presenting information. The other thing that was interesting was 10% of pastors are divorced. So studies estimate, this is self-identified, and these are multiple studies put together. 10 to 40% of pastors have admitted to engaging in some sort of extramarital affair.
Oh, I believe that.
And 14 to 18% of those were specifically physical.
Do you know what percentage of that was men?
Probably
you
at least 87.1%.
You don't hear about a lot of female pastors doing that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Bible verses out there, obviously, that argue against women in ministry and that advocate for women being very submissive. One of the more famous ones, 1 Timothy 2:12, talking about, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. She must be silent.
So from my understanding, in Timothy, it's being written to Timothy, who is at Ephesus, which is the city the book of Ephesians is written to. And in Ephesus, you had this giant temple to Artemis. I think that was the Roman name. I don't know what the Greek name was for the goddess. But there was a lot of women had a lot of power in this Artemis cult, and took a lot of the leadership in the speaking roles and stuff like that. Because you had all these women who were in the cult of Artemis and that jump over and become converts and then are looking to do all this teaching because they're used to leadership roles in the pagan one, but they haven't been educated in the way yet, and so they're should not be teaching yet. It was something like that I've heard of before, to where in 1 Timothy, it's not really historically what people use it as today. It was just like a blanket statement versus this was going a specific problem in a specific city.
Yeah, I believe it was prostitution worship was part of the thing that was going on too. And there's just a lot of chaos from what I have read as well. But yeah, also they weren't specifically permitted. They didn't specifically have education, so it was related to that more contextually than anything as well.
There's plenty of verses that are written by the same or similar authors that have this theme, right? Paul has a lot of writings, but a lot of them do have cultural happenings behind them. Why do you think as a church now that we're not taking that into consideration, really?
I think there is a strong background of, if you don't believe the Bible literally, you don't believe the Bible. If you have to do a surface reading, as it is what it says. And if you try to investigate and explain that what it says on paper is different from the spirit in which it was written, oh, well, you don't believe the Bible.
Yeah.
Well, no, I do. That's why I'm being studious. You know what I mean? I think there's this deep-seated background.
Well, yeah, I think to believe the Bible, and be able to read the Bible, you have to take into consideration not just the literal words, but the culture and the context. And that's part of reading the Bible.
What do the words mean?
That's part of reading the Bible.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know what you guys think, if there's other things too.
No, I think that's a huge part of it. There's so much cognitive dissonance because, so for example, in one of those passages, it says that women should cover their heads. No one, in no evangelical fundamentalist church that practices that kind of Christianity do they, well, there's some, I guess, very minimally, force women to cover their heads. So that part we don't care about, because that was apparently just, contextual, but not the rest of it, not the silence part. It just makes no sense why there's this and that. But I think part of it has been intentionally to weaponize, because just like it was weaponized for slavery, it's been weaponized for other things. And I think that's for control, partially has been weaponized for that.
Yeah, let's keep things as they are. We don't need women getting more involved and changing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, women didn't have the right to vote for however long, and I'm sure scripture was used to justify why that was okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because you got to submit to your husband. Your husband's the head of the household.
Right,
And
yeah.
there's still there's a lot of Republicans that advocate for that household votes. Yeah.
Insane. Crazy.
That feels very Handmaid's Tale to me.
Yeah.
Like, for sure.
Do you, like, as a man in Christianity, or having been in Christianity, do you feel like churches you've been a part of have tried to control women?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, talk about they want to control the way women dress all the time. That's almost the most important thing when you're a teenage girl in a church. How are you dressing? You making your brothers stumble? It's your fault. Wear something different.
Gosh, it sets us up so easy for abusive relationships. So easy
Because it's
for
your
abusive
fault that
relationships.
he did this, that he was tempted and he couldn't control it. It was your fault. What the?
Yeah, and there's no accountability. So on the one hand, men are like more, created for leadership, right? They're less emotional. They're more right. They're positioned to be the head of the household, protectors. But if your shoulder is showing, they can't handle it.
Yes.
It's like
Minor details.
Oh, okay. So I have to protect them from me.
Yeah.
But I'm supposed to be the weaker.
But they're supposed to be. I'm the weaker. Are you? Is this what?
Well, this is how
does
you
this
need to
make
help and
sense?
support them.
Yeah.
This is your helper role, right?
Are you really that strong? Do I want you protecting me if you can't handle someone's shoulder out, sir?
Sir.
No.
And the thing is like men say men aren't emotional. Well, men are only allowed to because of patriarchy. Men can only demonstrate one emotion, and that's anger. Anything else makes you less masculine. So you just have them inside, and only anger comes out. But men are just as emotional, and oftentimes men are less comfortable sitting with emotions because we're not taught how to do it when we're adolescents and stuff. But anger is easier to sit with and easier to get out. So a lot of sadness or disappointment or loneliness or grief just kind of goes under the umbrella of anger and comes out as anger. But we're not emotional because it's anger. That's a powerful emotion. That's a man emotion.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I want to circle back around to the whole helper thing. Because that's really what ruined me a little bit when it came to Christianity and patriarchy, and realizing that I feel like things were hidden from me out of possible control, out of, I don't know the motivation, but I don't know why you wouldn't want me to know this as a woman. Also, as you're translating the Bible. Because whenever God makes Eve, Genesis 2:18 says, the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. And they've taken that and they've really ran with that. My problem is that I hate the word that they chose to translate to helper, because that word is actually called ezer, and I'm probably saying it wrong, honestly. But in my opinion, it's misinterpreted, particularly in relation to gender roles. And so here are some facts about the word ezer. Ezer does mean help, support, or aid in Hebrew. Okay, it appears 21 times in the Old Testament. So this is what God is calling, when the word helper is in that verse, really it's saying, I will make for him an ezer. Okay? And so it appears 21 times in the Old Testament, this word ezer. And its usage in reference to women, it's used twice in Genesis to describe the first woman, Genesis 2:18 and 2:20. And the usage in other places it refers to God as Israel's help or rescuer. That doesn't sound like a submissive, at the very least, a submissive role. At the very least.
I mean, it
doesn't sound like that.
Yeah.
God's using the same word for himself.
God describes
Absolutely.
himself this way.
Yes,
And then
yeah.
three of the times it refers to powerful nations Israel called on for military aid.
Oh, like empires?
Yeah.
So women in empires are used with the same word. That's interesting.
You know what? Sorry, go ahead.
No, just the frequent use of the word ezer to describe God the most indicates strength, power, and not subordination. And there's this misinterpretation that Ezra has often been misunderstood to imply that women are to be the subordinate helpers. When really, I think when you really take the letters, it literally means that like they have an eye on the back of their head. And like,
in Hebrew.
Like, yes, can see everything and is able to come help in a warrior fashion.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I was just thinking about the fact that like, let's say you're watching a movie, okay? And the main character can't do something. So they bring in someone else. And then we call that person they bring in like the hero that then is able to help fulfill the thing that the first person couldn't do. So I'm just saying, maybe it's more of a, hey, I'm sending this person in to help you accomplish the goal you can't accomplish. Rather than it's your goal, they're just helping you do it. But no, it's this thing you're doing together because you can't do it by yourself.
Can I give a film example or a literary example for that? Okay, Lord of the Rings, Gandalf. Because he's sent from the Valar, okay, to Middle-earth to work on the whole Sauron problem. And he's there to not do it for them, but to help them. And I think of the Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, Battle of Helm's Deep. You got Rohan with Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn in Helm's Deep, surrounded. They're losing. They're going to do one last ride out and just like try and kill as many orcs as possible so the women and children can escape, right? But then who shows up? With the Rohirrim, with a bunch of horse riders from Rohan that were exiled. Gandalf. And comes and rescues and helps save them. I picture, when you were talking, I was picturing that scene with Gandalf and all of those Rohirrim riders being Ezra to Aragorn and Legolas and King Theoden and stuff. And like that is just, that's what an Ezra I feel like looks like if you're talking about these four nations that are coming to aid or God being as a helper. That's more of the picture.
That is more the picture. So imagine being someone who grows up in a conservative household with traditional gender roles who's really enmeshed in purity culture. And that's your whole framework for everything. And you're taught your identity is only in relation to this male counterpart. Like that is your identity. Only to find out later in life that actually that's not what the Bible says about being a woman. And then what do you do with that? And why would that not have been taught that way? Also, Eve's been given like this terrible rap, which I totally disagree with because when she was asked what she did, she was very honest about it. I was deceived because that's what happened. She was deceived. She's honest about it.
Yeah. And then what does Adam say?
It was the woman you sent me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not taking responsibility.
Do you remember there was a guy that I was talking to for like 2 days and we ended up just having a phone call to talk?
Oh yeah, tell us about that.
God.
Tell us. Because I wanted to bring up Christian dating.
Oh, it's
has to
terrible.
be a complete nightmare when it comes to, especially if you're a liberal woman.
It's like, so let me also, I should have said this earlier. I think there's 2 words that are helpful in this conversation. So the difference between what we would say is complementarianism and egalitarianism in the theological world. So egalitarianism is basically means equality, like people, denominations that believe men and women are equal. And then there's those that are complementarian, which means that they believe that they have different roles, but they complement each other. And typically they believe that in male leadership or whatever. So church I belong to is egalitarian. There are a lot of denominations that are, but there's also a lot of evangelical denominations that are complementarianism. So that really affects your theology, depending on kind of what your church you go to and whatever. So anyway, I was talking to this guy and he wanted to have a phone call just to chat. And I was like, sure. And he started... Well, the conversation itself was honestly just bizarre. But at one point, he started talking about how he didn't think women in general should be in leadership, like at all, like in any form or capacity, like not just in the church. And he said, yeah, you know, if a guy's like barking orders at me, then I'll be like, I don't want to do it, but I'll do it. But if a woman is barking orders at me, that's just disgusting. That's just, ugh. And this started because I mentioned that I'm like in the ministry world. That's not what I do full time, but you know, that's part of what I do. And then he brought up Genesis and said, well, everything's Eve's fault. So I don't, basically is what he said. Yeah.
Eat him alive.
And how do you interpret all these other passages? So I just like went on a brief tangent, not a whole, I wasn't going to waste all my time and energy on this because I knew that I was not going to talk to this person after this. And So I doubt anything I said actually changed his mind. But truly, if it's like I'm trying to talk to someone that is a Christian, it's like 50-50 to me. And do you think that I should have a right to say what I say? Which is insane.
Can you see how easy it would be for that man to be a Christian? To be a white, cis male?
Yeah, it sounds great.
I mean, this is
You're
the
in
religion for
charge.
you.
You're in charge.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know?
But I don't believe that Jesus' actual teachings teach that.
100%. Jesus was
His
a
actual
champion of women.
Teachings were very
Pro-women.
pro-women and progressive, right?
For the time, yes, absolutely.
But that theme should have continued through.
Yes.
And women should have been liberated via the church like
Yes.
Jesus was liberating women, and we did not do that. And instead, what we have now is a religion, by and far, that is really easy for white men to be involved and to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
Because remember, they used the Bible to condone slavery. It wasn't for black men. It didn't protect them or
And they
women.
tried to keep Bibles out of the hands of slaves
Yeah.
because they would read the verses they wanted to read to them, but they didn't want them to read the other passages because it would get them thinking.
They didn't want them
So,
reading, period.
My
learning how to
problem
read.
is
Yeah,
that kind of censorship we know happens and happened when it comes to slavery.
Yeah.
But I'm just supposed to trust as a female that the people who transcribed the Bible and did all the interpretation and did all the things, that is untouched, totally fine, totally 100% sound.
Yeah, when you lose authority and trust because of one thing, you lose it with everything else. So you have to like go back to the drawing board with everything else.
Well, and there's so much like,
And Ezra still isn't taught from the pulpit.
Well, no, and then there was all of this stuff that was, and I gotta look into that was said to have been changed by King James when he translated into the King James Version because he didn't want women to, like, they changed names and they changed
They changed
all of that stuff.
They changed Junia. They changed
Yeah,
Junia
to
to Junius because a woman couldn't be an apostle. So they just straight up changed her name to a man's name.
So sacrilegious.
When Paul, it was Paul who was saying, Paul's the infamous one for talking about how women should be quiet, but he's the one talking about how he met this woman in prison and she's better than he is, and to respect her when she gets out. And they were like, oh, yeah, that can't be a woman. We're going to have to, we're going to have to man wash this. And they did until 1995. They started adding in the right name again. And there's still like a handful of translations that don't have the woman's name in it. And we just brush that over.
Right.
We're just, shh, that didn't happen.
Or it's not that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal.
It's literally
It's like 2 letters.
Yeah.
Every letter counts.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because there's a book called Jesus and John Wayne, and I'm listening to a podcast interview with the author, from Kristen Dumais, who wrote it. And it's ultimately about like how white evangelicalism and conservatism became intermeshed and how we're at where we are now with like all of that in regards to politics and other things, culture. But one of the interesting things is like she talks about like the 50s and 60s when a lot of this started getting combined. It was right like Cold War era, right? And there was very much this like we have an enemy to face, and that is what leads to this like protectionism like kind of standpoint. And I think that what the church has also done over a long period of time is, well, if the enemy is tangible, if the enemy that we're fighting against is these moral values, is the communists, is whatever, it is a lot easier to keep to use that to control. So it's like the church has invited in fear instead of eradicating it when it comes to, I think when it comes to some of that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and so the church can use it nowadays too, with, if it's anti-legal or illegal immigration with immigrants, or about women and men.
It's very fear-based. Oh, we're losing something. When it's like, that's really, like, scripture says that our enemy isn't against flesh and blood. Like, it's not, that should never be this idea that these people are terrible. We need to fight against the trans people. Like, what? or whatever it is. Like, it almost feels at times like there's an invitation for fear, because that will then solidify the structure that we've created.
Well, that goes perfectly with penal substitution.
Yeah, fear-based gospel.
Fear-based gospel of the... Can you explain what I mean by penal substitution?
Yeah, so there's different atonement theories that explain just how the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ is applied to our lives for the forgiveness of sins, essentially. And penal substitution is the one that really came out of the Reformation. It's very legal and courtroom-based. Penal means law. And substitution, obviously, I think is kind of understood to be what it is. So penal substitution is the legal substitute for whatever punishment, consequence, sentencing in a legal sense that we had. And it's how God can maintain being just in a legal sense by still giving the same sentencing, but he can still show grace because of who gets the sentencing. But it kind of pits God against us. Like, God really wants to hurt us, but like Jesus just gets in between and says, wait,
look at me instead.
But it really pits God the Father against humanity, is like he was so angry at us and wants to send us to hell to burn forever and ever and ever. So there's problems with it. It is more recent, 500 or so years old. Before that, there's one called Christ is Victor, and early roots in the ransom theory that was really the predominant one for 1,000 years before penal substitution.
Universalism is even earlier than penal substitution. Like,
All right,
there
say
was
more about
church
that.
fathers that were universalists.
Yeah, there's some that from their writings looks like could be universalist, some that looks like could have been annihilationists.
So you said something about King James Version of the Bible. And something that is interesting about the Reformation and about when all this evangelical doctrine was taking place is we know now that there's a lot of flaws in the King James. And I think, like, universally we know that there's a lot of flaws.
Even in the
King
Greek
James.
text that it's based off of.
Yeah.
But this doctrine that came out of that time was based off of these faulty translations that they built entire doctrines off of. Even when they look back and they say that version, or the King James, for example, was crappy, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
But we built a whole empire off of it.
Yeah.
Like our foundation. And that is bothersome to me.
Yeah, and with that being the case, like, even if you don't agree with that, let's presuppose it for a minute, and then you have, and let's it comes out later. Oh, these big ideas that we live by and tell everyone to believe are based off these translations that are coming with more data, like the majority text, the minority or critical text. These aren't really the proper translations or the proper Greek text to translate for most accuracy. But we really can't backpedal and be public about that, because then, it's going to destroy our credibility and therefore destroy our authority, because we base it on this for hundreds of years. How can people trust anything else we've come up with over the past several hundred years and tell them that, hey, this is correct theology?
Martin Luther took out the Apocrypha, essentially, of the Catholic Church because he thought, or he felt, that if it wasn't written in original Hebrew
or Greek,
if it wasn't written in original Hebrew or Greek, it didn't deserve to be in there. Well, since then, we've discovered more text and found that some of these books are in Hebrew or Greek, but they didn't get added back in.
Right. Oh, yeah. We talked about that before. Yeah.
Even though it now met the standard.
Right.
They didn't get added back in.
You can't backpedal.
It's like pulling a string and they're afraid what's going to come undone.
Even though, around the time of Jesus, they would have been using the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which the Septuagint included the apocryphal books, which was the Old Testament scriptures Jesus would quote and reference.
That concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us next week for part 2 of this series.
I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow. and maybe a nice review.